So welcome to our July Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. The year is really speeding by, but we're really excited to be here. This is actually our guest speaker today. Dr. Michelle Schroeder-Moreno is joining us to talk about soil mycorrhizae. This is a topic we actually started thinking about last year. It would be a really good topic for plants, pests, and pathogens. So it's wonderful to get to this point and have her here. So she'll be leading off today. I'll introduce her in just a minute and turn things over to her, but just want to let everybody know to be sure to hang around because we will have bolos. Be on the lookout. After Michelle talks to us about soil mycorrhizae, where Mike Munster and Matt Bertone with the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic will let us know about the current issues that we're seeing on plants across North Carolina. I'll finish us out with a Plant These Instead feature. We'll be looking at better options to English ivy today, so things you can plant instead of English ivy, and we'll close out with some program announcements. I'm really excited for a couple of reasons to have Michelle here with us today. So Dr. Michelle Schroeder-Moreno is an agroecology professor in the Department of Crop and Soil Sciences at NC State University, where she provides leadership for the agroecology education programs. This includes the Bachelor of Science program and the Agroecology Education Forum that is dedicated to hands-on education for diverse students in the surrounding community, and could be a potential field trip location for Master Gardener groups. Just wanted to throw that in there. In addition, Michelle currently serves as the NC State Interim Director for the Center of Environmental Farming Systems. This is also sometimes called CEFS. CEFS is a 2,000-acre facility located in Goldsboro, and that's in the eastern part of the state. It is dedicated to sustainable agriculture and food systems research, education, and extension. Among her many contributions to the field of agroecology, Michelle was a founding member of the National Sustainable Agriculture Education Association, which helped to elevate agroecology as a discipline. Michelle received the USDA National Teaching Award in 2019 in recognition for her innovation in agroecology education. So Michelle, we are so happy to have you here. I am going to stop my share so you can start sharing your screen. And it's just wonderful to have you here to talk about soil mycorrhizae today and share your multiple expertise and knowledge on this topic.
Well, I want to first thank you, Charlotte and Caroline, for helping organize this. And it's just a pleasure today to talk about one of my favorite things. So I really appreciate it. And thank you for the wonderful introduction too. So hopefully everyone can hear me all right. And I'm going to go through a little bit holistically about agroecology, soil health, and then kind of how we bring these together for mycorrhizal fungi. As Charlotte mentioned, I teach agroecology at NC State, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, and currently serve as interim director of CEFS. I always like to start kind of where we're going and where we're heading. And I will say I love questions. I know Charlotte encouraged you to put those in the chat. So please do that, and we'll have time at the end for questions too. It's just a kind of a road sign, kind of where we're heading a little bit with this talk. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and agroecology, a little bit about soil health and the soil biology. It's a little eye-opening, kind of what we know and what we don't know. And then really one of the components of soil biology, I feel a very important one, mycorrhizal fungi, and we'll spend a lot of time on that. And I'll really hone in on kind of what they are, benefits to not just crops and plants, but also to the holistic system. And then we'll end with kind of practices to enhance mycorrhizal fungi as well. Let's see, there we go. So a little bit about me. I've been at NC State for over 17 years. And I have a sliver of research, mostly academic. As Charlotte mentioned, I developed and designed our agroecology program, and now a little bit split with administrative functions. And so most I do is teach agroecology and agroecology lab. my background is that I'm an ecologist. My degrees are in ecology and evolutionary biology, and I've worked in soil ecology for a while. Both here, some of my favorite things is working directly with farmers and on-farm research, whether that be in strawberries in North Carolina, more tropical crops I've done in the past, mostly in Latin America. And I've taught study abroad and then was a Fulbright scholar in Croatia. I always like to say the why when I talk about things, kind of what motivates me is both kind of sustainable agriculture research, mycorrhizal fungi, looking to conserve natural resources, and really fundamental, that being fundamental to food security. And my second why, really why I do so much academics is, as a first generation college student myself, I know that kind of where we are with education is really is empowering, and what we're able to do and give back in our own community. Just a little bit about that. One of the hats I wear for the Center for Environmental Farming Systems. I mentioned we're out east in Wayne County. I'm not sure if anybody here is representing Wayne County, but we're in Goldsboro. CEFS, or the Center for Environmental Farming Systems, is a partnership among our two universities, our land grants, NC A&T University and North Carolina State University, with the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. It's one of our biggest stations in the nation dedicated to sustainable agriculture research, education, and extension. We have just a little plug. We have an organic grains field day coming up next week. I'm more than happy to share that, or it's on our website as well. We have a lot of programming throughout the state in food systems as well as agricultural systems. As Charlotte mentioned, I do direct our agroecology major, which is agroecology and sustainable food systems. I want to say importantly, this is a cross-departmental effort and major with the Department of Crop and Soil Science, where I am, as well as the Department of Horticulture. We're really trying to bring the best of both worlds and the strength of those and knowledge of those programs together for students with some of these career-focused concentrations. And I just put the website down there if you're interested. So if this is something you want to study, we do have that. Or like Charlotte, maybe you have a son or daughter that's interested, or folks in your community, I would appreciate you please letting them know about that. As Charlotte mentioned, I really believe in, we're in agriculture and horticulture. We got to get our hands dirty a little bit and learn by doing. And I developed a agroecology education farm where the focus is on education. It's in the title. And we're a bit of a combination, I would say, of a student farm. We do have a lot of students out there, but also a little bit of community focus and community garden. We do workshops. Normally we have community volunteer times. With COVID, that's been cut down a little bit. But it's about 6 acres, about 1.25 acres in production. And in that 1.25 acres, we can produce easily 20,000 pounds. All of that produce either goes to mostly the NC State dining, or our chefs turn it into amazing things. What I always say, we educate back on the plate for the greater mass of our NC State students. And then we also donate a lot to our Interfaith Food Shuttle, a nearby food bank, and we have a new pantry on campus. And I would love to host any master gardeners that would love to come and visit us. We would be more than happy. So I've been throwing around this word a lot. I feel like it's good for us to step back and define it. What is agroecology? And you might hear it in the name. It's the blend of agriculture or agronomy, the study of agriculture, and ecology, the study of natural systems. So what we're doing is, from our application and concepts from ecology, we're applying them for the design and management of sustainable systems, farm systems, or agro-ecosystem, kind of treating that farm as an ecosystem. In a nutshell, agroecology is the science behind sustainable agriculture, understanding who is there, how they're functioning, how the impacts in the system how we both impact agriculture positively, how agriculture can impact the system. And over the long term, we're not just talking about one season. We can also apply the same concept, not just at the farm level, but in the whole food system level as well. So understanding, for example, how nitrogen flows through the system or energy as well. It's multidisciplinary and requires systems level thinking. What that means is we're kind of teaching not just one discipline, but a bit of all of these, including the sociology, how our communities are impacted, how our community can impact agriculture for the better, as well as the economics. We talk about, always in agriculture, the bottom line. In sustainable agriculture, we're talking about the triple bottom line, both economics, people, as well as the natural resources or ecology. And I tell you this because we're going to use this systems level thinking in the same way I'm going to come back to and how we think about mycorrhizal fungi and practices that positively impact them. So to do that, we want to first start in the soil. And I love this. There's been a World Soil Day, December 5th, for a number of years. And the idea of soil health and the importance of soil has really taken off, I would say, since 2015 or even before that. A lot of good researchers coming together, but also education as well. And I don't need to tell you this, how important it is. Kind of the healthy soils are key to our ability to produce food and food security and nutrition for all. I love this graphic. 95% of our food comes from soil. I kind of wonder, where's the 5%? You think it's more than that. But so what we do in the soil, in agriculture, I think we can do a much better and sustainable production. It impacts that. And do things like mitigate some of our climate change impacts as well. We have all these functions in the soil, not just supporting crop growth, but climate regulation, as I mentioned, even reducing some of the contaminants, breaking those down, sequestering carbon, even some of our anthropology and cultural heritage, providing foundation for our structures, materials. And I really think about the biology in the soil, and we'll come back to that and focus on that. And all these concepts are really put in together in the idea of soil health. And there's a lot of different definitions out there. It's hard to get soil scientists to even agree upon them, but this is one of the more simplistic definitions. It's really soil health as the capacity of the soil to perform these ecosystem functions, all those functions that you saw, especially ones related to sequestering carbon, providing an environment for the soil biology, to do functions like support plant growth, biological organisms, resist erosion, and the negative impacts on our natural resources. And soil health, the three fundamental parts of it is both our physical soil properties, biological properties, and chemical. And that's how we start to describe soil properties, all of these three things together. Now, soil health itself, we cannot directly measure because it's a integration of physical, biological, and chemical. So we use indicators that represent these physical, biological, and chemical. And indicators allow us to understand kind of this complexity of soil health. I will say there's some examples of indicators here, things like on the physical, things like aggregate stability, so how the little soil particles and aggregates hold up, especially against disturbances from erosion and other things. Chemical, soil nutrients, that's pretty straightforward. Biological, I have this big kind of question mark because that is really our black box. And we're going to take apart just a little sliver of that black box today with mycorrhizal fungi. And what's important is when we choose these indicators that they change relative to practices. The Cornell University does have one of the few laboratories in the nation that does do soil health testing. You could send in soil samples there for a fee, just like how we have labs that do soil nutrient analysis. And so there's a lot of things that indicators for soil health, chemical properties, physical, biological, but one thing at the center of it is organic matter. Now, organic matter itself, we could measure the amount of it, that's a physical property, but the amount of soil organic matter and how we influence that in agriculture influences all the chemical properties, the physical and the biological. And there's huge benefits to soil organic matter, and I would say especially in our soils in the South. We usually start out with lower amounts of soil organic matter, unless you're in rare conditions like the Blacklands, where you have a lot, but most of our soils have a lower amount of soil organic matter. And we know there's benefits biologically. It's kind of the energy, the fuel for the whole soil food web. We know for nutrients, it's a real source of nitrogen, among other things. And we also know that it's improving physical properties, holding water, increasing pores. And so in sustainable agriculture, our goals are threefold. At the very least, we don't want to lose what we have. We really want to increase or maintain, I would say, soil organic matters or increase. But we also, it's not just the amount, but the diversity and types of soil organic matter. So you see here, this is a lovely tomato at Peregrine Farms in Alamance County, Alex and Betsy Hitz. And they have a winter cover crop that's vetch and rye. You could barely see the vetch, is mostly rye now. But that vetch turned over very quickly, that nitrogen legume cover crop, and the rye, winter rye, is decomposing at a much slower rate with all that lignin and hemicellulose. And so here we have a diversity of soil organic matter. The soil biology in decomposing that organic matter can do all of these things in the soil, those functions in the soil. So some of our main functions are a result of the soil biology activity, things like, it's not just pathogens in the soil, but we have beneficials in the soil, like mycorrhizal fungi that can offer some plant protection, increase nutrients. We have others that are bacteria and other types of fungi that are decomposing the residues and functioning nutrient cycling, water storage, and filtration. So it's a big question. I say, who's there in the soil? Kind of our ecosystem hat on. What soil biology is present, how much, and what are they doing? And I'll tell you, it's a bit of a challenge right now. We don't exactly know what to measure. We have these three kind of areas I mentioned. We can tell you a little bit about who's there. We do these by microbial biomass, the amount of microbes, basically amount of bacteria, some fungi. We might be able to we can also look at the composition through lipid profiles or DNA or RNA sequencing, who's there. But really what we want to get at is their function. So it's not just about diversity, it's about the functional diversity. What kind of functions in the soil are they impacting? How are they adding to sequestering carbon, mineralizing carbon and nitrogen? How do they provide enzymes or catalyze enzymes to break down and make nitrogen available as well? One of those soil health indicators in biology is mycorrhizal fungi. And that's what the rest of our talk is going to be about. So I will say arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, AM fungi, that's what I'm going to call it throughout the rest of the talk. So this is a tongue twister a little bit, is defined as a mutualistic association. So these are not parasitic, between a type of fungi, Glomeromycota, that's just the family, and plant root cortical cells. So that means inside the root, here we have a longitudinal section, And it's in the cortex of the root between the epidermis and between the xylem and the phloem. That's where you find the structures. Over 80% of plants in the world that have been examined have this type of mycorrhizas. So I'm kind of alluding, there's some other types of mycorrhizas, and I'll show you quick pictures. There are many benefits we'll talk about. They're obligate symbionts. That means the fungi have to get carbon from a living plant. Now, they cannot decompose organic matter like other type of fungi, things like truffles and chanterelles and other things we might be more common. In fact, they don't make big fruiting bodies either. And they're characterized by hyphae in the soil, we call external hyphae. Things inside the root called vesicles, we'll look at these in a little bit. Arbuscules, it's Latin for like little tree, arbol, and of course their spore morphology. I always like to start with this. AM, or arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, have been around for millions of years. They may not have started to be mutualistic. In fact, there's different theories. They could have been, even parasitic. And you can see, we know they've been around for give or take 420 million years, because in early fossil records of especially, this is prevascular plants, those little holdfasts like liverworts and things, you can see their same structures in the roots of those fossils. So I say this because they have seen many changes, both soil, atmosphere, temperature changes, and they're a bit more resistant, I think, than we think about. There are other types of mycorrhizas I'm not going to talk about today, but I want you to know that they exist. Conifers and pines have their own type of mycorrhizas called ectomycorrhizas. In fact, the forestry system is very good. They're usually inoculated. These are pine roots. You can see they're kind of thick. They're dichotomous, so they are branching here. Not a lot of fine roots, and this little sock of hyphae is the ectomycorrhiza around them. Orchids have their own mycorrhizas, and this is some of the structures stained blue in the roots. The whole family of ericoids, like blueberries, have their own mycorrhizas as well, characterized by different structures and different types of fungal taxonomy. I don't know if any of you are familiar with monotropids. They're loosely related to the ericoids. We can find them in the mountains. I think they're called Indian pipe as well. You can see they lack chlorophyll, and they associate with mycorrhizas that are associated with another tree, surrounding tree species. So the mycorrhizas is pulling the carbon into the hyphae and giving it to this plant. So two plants and then the fungi acting together. And then arbutoids, manzanita, some Western species have their own mycorrhizas as well. But we're going to talk about arbuscular mycorrhizas because these are the most prominent in every major ecosystem and in every major agricultural system. This is how I want you to think about mycorrhizas. This great graphic here, you see kind of a taproot coming down, primary, secondary roots, and all that little light kind of purplish blue are the hyphae coming off. And you can see it helps extend the absorptive surface area of roots. So they're going beyond the roots themselves and going out in the soil, exploring for nutrient uptake. And yeah, so the plant treats it as extension of the roots and invests in carbon in these mycorrhizas. And this is what the mycorrhizas look like. A lot of times we talk about mycorrhizas and then you never really see them. They're hard to see. This is some pictures from my own research. So this is a strawberry root that has been stained. So we have these little blue structures and we have this blue hyphae coming off. You can see how much smaller it is than the root itself. And in here, you'll see kind of fuzzy things. And this is under the dissecting scope, and down here under the compound scope, you can see that these fuzzy things are the arbuscule. It looks like a tree. And that's really the site of exchange The plant is giving the fungi carbon, and then the fungi is giving the plant usually increased nutrients, namely phosphorus, but it can also be nitrogen. I looked at iron and some other things as well. And these more darker kind of, I call them blue oblong balls, that's vesicles, and they're just lipid stored organs by the fungi. And I always like to say a fun fact is mycorrhizal fungi, they don't make fruiting bodies like, we're familiar with. They do make these big spores. They are the biggest spores in the fungal kingdom, which means I can almost roll them around in my fingers. But we use these spores to identify the specific species. You'll see it's germinating, and that's how it colonizes other roots. And another important thing is they aren't dispersed by air. These spores are too big. So water, yes, but can move them around, but usually it's through the growing hyphae, so not by air. This is a columella eye view of the soil, or earthworm eye view, kind of a root, an aggregate, mycorrhizal spores, and that hyphae, that kind of golden strings in the soil. We know that mycorrhizal fungi, arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, can improve growth and survival of plants. Some of our work has been in strawberries. I know it might not seem like a lot, but we have inoculated strawberries, 20% growth greater, that actually resulted in greater yields after they were planted, because that 20% increase in growth of little plugs that go out, it's kind of like a bank account that accumulates over time. I've also done work with, this is more in South Florida where I was before, with lychee or lychee trees, and we could reduce the amount of nutrients going on fertilizers with the addition of mycorrhizal fungi from air layered trees. The growth effects are big. This is probably the biggest example without mycorrhizas, with mycorrhizas. And this is an ectomycorrhizal example. I'm cheating a little bit. Here's pines. And this was the example of when they began pine production in Puerto Rico. This was during the 40s and 50s and 60s. They were growing them without mycorrhizas. Once they added them, they had great increase of growth. Now, I always like to say nothing's for free in ecology or natural systems. There's always a carbon cost to mycorrhizas. For the most part, that benefit of increased nutrients, namely phosphorus, outweighs that carbon cost. Another mutualistic association that has a carbon cost is rhizobium. The increase in nitrogen uptake from the rhizobia bacteria also has a carbon cost, but usually that benefit outweighs that. We have benefits not just to increase nutrient uptake, but also increase resistant to drought stress. And these are just studies that have shown this. Mycorrhizal fungi can sometimes provide protection from other fungal pathogens. And we've seen increases because of these things in crop growth and yields, but also to the soil environment. And I think this is really important. These hyphae can fuse aggregates together. When we have greater aggregation, we have greater water holding capacity, greater nutrient holding capacity, resistance to erosion as well. We have a cooperative extension article about some of the work we've done to create kind of good, sustainable soil management practices in strawberry production that are not just good for mycorrhizas, but overall soil health, getting to that holistic part of things. So here's probably the question you're thinking about. I've seen them in the marketplace. Can't I just buy mycorrhizas and add them? I always say this, caveat emptor, buyer beware. One, yes, you can inoculate it, inoculate it in transplants. I would say is probably a better thing. There are many commercially available products. There are not a lot of regulations. Some have dead fungi. They also have fertilizers in there, and you may be seeing the effects from fertilizers, not just mycorrhizas. I think the best thing you can do is create the right soil conditions that favor native mycorrhizas and all beneficial soil organisms. So what are those? What are good soil conditions, good management practices? One, I've mentioned that mycorrhizas are obligate for carbon, so let's have a good host. We have a lot of hosts, good hosts in cover crops or crops, legumes, grasses, most plants. There is the non-mycorrhizal groups, so Brassicaceae, but even with a minor, Brassicaceae, like, thinking about broccoli and things like that, cauliflower, even having them integrated with other hosts isn't going to make that. I think it's just a monoculture of Brassicaceae again and again is where you kind of see the populations of mycorrhizas start to decrease. Reducing heavy fertilizer applications, especially very soluble forms of phosphorus, we have seen mycorrhizal populations go down. Fungicides, reducing, eliminating if possible. Our biocides, that's why I worked with strawberry, is looking at alternatives to methyl bromide. Reducing tillage, I think they are a little bit more resistant than we think. So some tillage is okay, not just deep, continuous, full scale, but how do we start to manage maybe even when we till or how much tillage is done. And using cover crops in off cycles, keeping the ground living, not just the ground covered as well. And this is a good example of crimson clover winter cover crop, providing a multiple benefits, not just to mycorrhizas below ground, to pollinators above ground. So again, I want to leave you with this systems approach to manage for overall soil health, not just mycorrhizas. It's important today, but thinking how we do tillage, how we rotate both in time and space, how that differences in residue decomposes, providing different types of food sources for different types of organisms. And what that host is as well, providing good hosts and diverse hosts, especially that add organic matter. I have a few places if you'd like to look for information for things I've talked about, but really I'd like to answer some questions now, if that's okay. So I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you, Michelle. That was wonderful. I know folks are gonna appreciate that you have offered to share your slides as a PDF. Lots of good information. I can't wait to look a little closer at them myself. We did have a question come in, sort of the big picture. Would love your thoughts on it.
Yeah.
What would you say the difference is between the terms regenerative agriculture movement, the regenerative, versus sustainable agriculture? It comes from here.
That's a great question. And we're certainly getting a lot of that. I think regenerative agriculture is a bit of becoming a buzzword. Two, I would say I view it like this. Sustainable agriculture is this large umbrella. And within it, and in many years of research and policies around that, it's about sustaining for the future. Regenerative agriculture, which is primarily focused, I would say, on soils, which is great. And so sustainable is not just soils, but thinking about the economics in society as well as natural resources. Regenerative agriculture is saying, not just can we sustain it, can we improve, especially soil fertility, organic matter, things like that over time, carbon sequestration or climate mitigation. And so I think the folks that work in sustainable agriculture are also working in regenerative agriculture. Maybe some of them aren't using that term, but I think we're all on the same page and same team as well.
Thank you. Excellent. Lots of good questions coming in. I'm going to cruise through these and see. One of them is, do the brassicas reduce soil mycorrhiza or just not support them? That's
a great question. And that's why I started with mycorrhizal fungi. Have been around for a long time and seen a lot of changes. So certainly in the farm we manage, we have Brassicaceae, they're important crops. And we have not seen them reduce so much because we have so many other good hosts that were supporting in space and time. So I think the key is, like anything, is diversity. So some brassicasées are not going to impact the populations too much. In fact, there's other things that I think, like heavy fungicide use, that may be more impactful.
Okay, that's a perfect segue, because a few things are coming in relating to, can fungicide use have a negative effect on mycorrhizal? Someone mentions Daconil, and also wondering about copper sulfates,
Yes, copper sulfates. I don't know Daconil. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with it. If it is a fungicide, like, and it's being applied to soil, I think that's the key, depending upon the amounts. Yeah, it can have, I think the first effect is it reduces the amount. Sorry, I'm gonna have a dog bark. Just a second, sorry. It'll reduce the amount of hyphae in the soil. Now, the fungi are producing spores. Don't know if you saw, but they have a thick wall. Those spores are a bit resistant to some of the changes in soil, like tillage and others. And so the mycorrhizas can persist in times of stress. They'll make spores, but that hyphae in the soil is one, how mycorrhizas are getting around, and the real benefit to mycorrhizas. So fungicides, definitely, that's the first thing you see impact. For my work on methyl bromide, unfortunately, I worked with that over a number of years, and that's a biocide that's killing everything in the soil. It took a number of years, 3 or 4, for mycorrhizas to come back. And that was even inoculating with mycorrhizas. It just wasn't a good environment. There was no good hosts or maybe soil conditions for it to persist. So, you know, it's a mix. Copper sulfates are usually sprayed on the leaves. So there's less directly going in the soil. So I imagine that's less of an impact, but there is, yes, copper is going to affect mostly all fungi.
Okay, yes.
I would just throw in there that Daconil is chlorothalonil. So it's usually applied to the foliage rather than as a full drench. So I think that's the key. You were saying if it's foliage applied, it could have some effect because it could, you know, run off and could end up in the soil. But the soil applications are going to be the most damaging.
Yes, that's right. And especially even, you know, in some systems, we're drenching the soil with fungicides. That's where you would see the bigger impacts.
Okay. I guess alternatively, how about fertilization? Someone asks about, you know, particularly like tree shrub fertilizer stakes. Would those be harmful to mycorrhizae?
No, and, you know, again, especially the fertilizers that have even both synthetic and organic can be impactful. I always say that, you know, fertilizers are fertilizers. Depending upon the amount, we can see negative impacts. But things that are breaking down slower, so either slow release synthetic, and I imagine those tree sticks are more slower released, and some organics, they're going to have less of an impact than a very high amount and highly soluble. Think of it like Miracle-Gro. That's going to have an impact, and primarily on that hyphae first.
Okay, yes. You know, folks are also inquiring about helping the mycorrhizae. Are there products or even practices? You went over some of the concepts of, you know, having healthy soil, but products that people might be seeing to add to their soil or to container grown plants. Are there things that, could you comment on that?
There are so many products out there, Caroline. I really appreciate the comment. I know folks, we tend to look at those kind of almost like we do with our health and vitamins. Like, if I just take this, everything will be okay. And I kind of always tend to ask, you know, is it necessary? And for many of our systems, it's not. If we have a diverse system, unless there has been a history of heavy amounts of fungicides. I mean, I was working with inoculants with strawberries because we do have a longer history with strawberry growers with fumigation. So I think that's appropriate. Or maybe years of brassicaceae crops. Now there's, I think, the other challenge with some of these products is we don't have a regulating arm checking these products, that either they're alive or that they're functioning. And I've looked at a number of products where it's a lot of dead things. So there can be a shelf life for mycorrhizal inoculants. It's mostly in spore form. But if they're exposed to heat or moisture, it kind of breaks down a little bit. So I always say start with the fundamentals first. Organic matter increasing, not losing it, creating diverse and time and space systems, and some good hosts in there. And you're going to have the right environment that even if you apply these things, they're going to persist. Because I think what we don't want to get ourselves into feeling is I have to buy this thing every year and keep adding it, because it is very expensive too. And if you are going to add it, I would say it would be good in the transplant stage. So the roots become, the early first roots become inoculated, and you're using a lot less of it.
That's so true. We think about all those probiotics on the market for our own stomachs, and are they really alive, not alive? How old are they? One person asks about if you have a recommendation on a percentage of organic matter that's desirable.
Yeah, that's a bit hard. So our soils can be 2, 3, 4% organic matter, and that's the active fraction. So organic matter can be what is actively decomposing, and split it also into things that are the humic fraction that's already been decomposed. Our North Carolina Department of Agriculture Consumer Services soil report, like what you're probably familiar looking at, that reports on just that humic fraction, which is a very small amount. And so I think it's hard for us we'd have to really see the active fraction to know as a grower, am I increasing it over time? So I tend to think about it and look visually. Do I see residues on the surface? You know, my goal is 20 or 30%. Am I adding or more organic matter in that I'm removing via harvest? And am I adding different types of organic matter? And so percentage wise, I think we just, want to aim still for that 4 or 5%, but we don't really have a method that's easy for growers to measure that. So hard to be quantitative with it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You touched on this, and another question has come in about tillage, and does it destroy mycorrhizal fungi? And I think you alluded to, frequency and depth, but what else might you have to say on tillage?
Yeah, so the first thing tillage does, if we think about that root I showed you with that hyphal network moving around, it destroys that hyphal network. And some mycorrhizas species are able to reestablish that very quickly being a week or two. And some species, not as much. But I have done research with the Center for Environmental Farming Systems. We have a long-term farming systems trial, not just 1 season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons. These are 25 years plus of systems with tillage, no tillage, organic, best management practices, crop animal rotation. And I have not seen a big impact of tillage, because that's one of our variables in conventional and organic, impact the community of mycorrhizas there. And so I tend to think that they're a bit more resistant than we think. Some of the abundance might have gone down, but they're able to kind of come back up. So who's there? That kind of ecology question isn't changing much with tillage. And, this is, again, tillage with best management practices. It's, so it's not as much, but I tend to think that in general with soil biology, we want to not do full scale, not do deep, and not do, you know, a number of tillage events in a season.
Yes, yes. A couple different questions about going back to container grown plants, which, you know, is important for our kind of some of the people that we answer questions for. Are there products, I guess, or would you encourage mycorrhizal growth using humic acid? What would you say about container grown plants and that maybe need to get it going? But
yeah, like I've done that. You know, we have grown, you know, trees and strawberries and tomatoes and, you know, goodness, papayas in the tropics as a start. We have added mycorrhizas. I'll tell you, there did seem to be an synergistic impact in some of our strawberry work when we added vermicompost and mycorrhizas together. And I think it may be about that vermicompost, which is a living soil amendment, you know, as well, kind of creating the right conditions for some of those mycorrhizas to persist over time. And I was really surprised that it actually resulted in, you know, full season, you know, harvestable impacts too.
Oh, good, good. Excellent.
But we didn't see it from vermicompost alone or mycorrhizas alone, which was interesting.
Okay, combination.
So we're not sure why. That's another study.
All right. Still, more work to do is always a good thing.
Yes.
And then Chris is asking once again about clover as a ground cover in between your rows. And is that helpful in increasing mycorrhiza?
I definitely think so. So this is something at the agroecology farm. We have a new food forest area. So with perennials, it took me a while to commit to where I wanted to put the perennials, because that is a commitment. And, you know, we were so focused on the fruit trees and things, and we have grass ways, but I want to put in actually white clover. That's the next step. And, you know, thinking about the above ground benefits and the below ground benefits. So it's not only a good support for mycorrhizas, it's good for rhizobia as well and other soil organisms. And then the above ground benefit is it's, you know, flowering early, bringing some of our bees to some of our crops that are bee pollinated. And you can walk on it.
Yes.
There isn't, I think, or I was just going to mention, we had a food forest webinar last week, and somebody was asking me about native white clover, and I don't believe that there is. It's a European variety. That's what's mostly at least sold.
Okay. And I think we'll finish up with this last question, which is, about some of our new developments and housing and new developments, and folks are trying to establish gardens. Maybe that topsoil has been stripped off.
Yeah.
Your suggestion on where to begin on rebuilding that?
That's a great question. I could tell you from my own experience, both in developing the agroecology farm, it was severely eroded from corn rows planted in the wrong direction, let's say on a slope. And then, you know, in our own house, is I first started with bringing in organic matter via compost. And then I actually grew cover crops right on top of that. So at least a season of cover crops. For us, it was winter, and a good mixture of a legume, a grass, both adding that kind of double benefit of getting nitrogen back in the soil, as well as organic matter. And the compost we use now pretty much every season. So I would say that for me was the first, getting, you know, that compost is really that humic fraction of the organic matter. It's stabilized, but then getting a living kind of something in it too. That's gonna, you know, the whole purpose of the cover crop is to put that organic matter back in the soil. And the compost really gave a boost to the cover crop growing too. So that's where I would begin.
Yeah. And probably a dose of patience is probably the hardest part of it all, right? Instead of wanting to get those foundation shrubs planted, patience would be the right thing to do.
Yeah, you're
Your
exactly
compost.
right. In these clay soils, we do have to, I would say the other aspect is, learning giving people maybe tools to learn about how the water flows on their area, how the sun, moves as well. And it's not a one and done deal. So you may plant a few things this year and then, kind of ease into it as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. This has been wonderful. You've touched on so many different areas of interest for us and given us some really good resources to follow up with afterwards.
I appreciate your just support, and I love the question. Thank you very much for inviting me.
And you have had 122 people on this morning to hear this. So if you spread your knowledge far and wide. Charlotte, I'll turn it back over to you to perhaps move us on to bolos.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Michelle. That was excellent. And thank you, Caroline. Great job with all the questions. And so as Caroline mentioned, it's now time to move on to bolos. Be on the lookout. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt and Mike to share their screen and let us know what kind of pests are out there that we need to be on the lookout for.
Thanks, Charlotte. I think I'm going to go first today. Mike, is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. All righty. All right, can everyone, let's see, can everyone see this? Okay, everybody?
Yes, looking good.
Great.
Looks good.
Okay, let's talk about some insect bolos for August. Of course, there aren't a lot of things that are very specific to this time of year. A lot of things have already emerged and become active in July, but they're going to continue through August. And so I'm just going to touch on some of those things. So of course, there are going to be still a lot of garden yard pests, including a lot of caterpillars like hornworms, parsley worms, squash vine borers, garden flea hoppers, which are not a caterpillar. Also, this is the time of year when we do start to see potential fall armyworm and sod webworms in lawns. So they are species that typically, the sod webworms especially and the tropical sod webworms are typically southern, and they make their way up here every year. And so they're usually late season. So check your lawns. You can do soapy water flushes to flush out larvae. Look if you see damage. But otherwise, there's going to be lots of larvae and things like that still active right now in the garden and the yard. Wasp nests are getting bigger. So they're starting to become a critical mass where they're out hunting a lot of prey for their young, as well as they're going to begin to produce males and queens that will mate. And when the temperatures get cooler in the fall, the colonies will die out and the mated queens will overwinter. So right now you're going to be seeing a lot of activity. We're hearing a lot of calls about yellow jackets everywhere in homes and in yards. Paper wasp nests are big, but also a lot of solitary wasp activity like mud daubers and the big cicada killers and things like that. So all of those things are active right now, trying to get in last month or so of activity before it starts to get cool again. Late season flowers, there's a whole big blooming of different flowers that come near the end of the season in the late summer, early fall. These are going to be attracting a lot of insects, pollinators as well, from all different types of critters, butterflies, wasps, beetles, and whatnot, from both wild and cultivated flowers. So check them out. There's some really interesting insects that visit flowers. Of course, you're hearing them now, but the cicadas are out and about, and there's peak cicada season right now. These are going to be the annual cicadas, unlike the periodical cicadas that came out earlier in the year in some regions of North Carolina. These are going to be found throughout North Carolina, basically, And there are many species of these large green and black, different colored annual or dog day cicadas. These are two different species. You can see the different color patterns, different shapes, both in the genus Neotibicin. But these are going to be the common ones. And of course, that's also why the cicada killers are out and about as well, hunting these hosts, these prey for their young. A lot of the things that have one generation per year are going to become fully mature at this time of year. Into August and September is about the end of their season. They have spent all year growing, and now they're out there mating, reproducing. Some of them, so you're going to see a lot of larger praying mantises. Start noticing them more. The adult wheel bugs, the larger garden spiders, and a lot of the larger orb weavers that, again, they've spent most of the year growing and developing. Same with a lot of the larger caterpillars. So this is one of the walnut. This is a walnut prominent. They're going to be finishing up their feeding in trees, and many of those are so high up you don't see them normally. And then they start crawling down the trees. You start seeing them because they're going into the soil to pupate and overwinter until next year. So again, many of these things, because the year is kind of moving on, we're getting to the latter half of the year, and they're only one generation per year. They're at their maximum size, or they're beginning to be their maximum size. And so you'll start to notice them more. As always, it's a good time to remove bagworm bags if you see them. These are going to be, right now, we're kind of they've been feeding for a while. They may still be large caterpillars, but also beginning to tie off and pupate. The pupae will then emerge as either males that leave the bag and mate with females that are stuck in the bags. Not really stuck. I guess they're pretty happy there. And so this time of year, they're going to be tying off, and it's when you can start to remove them. So again, you don't want to just rip them off. You want to sever or slice or cut this little ring around the twig. That'll keep it from girdling the plant, even if you do remove the bag. And of course, lots and lots more. So again, this time of year, we're seeing a lot of the insects are becoming bigger, louder. It's nice and warm. There's a lot of activity out there. You'll see things like these mature red-headed bush crickets, some crazy caterpillars, lots of flies and tree hoppers and things like that. But this is just a random smattering of some things that you'll see out there. So go out and explore, see what's there. And as always, let us know if you need help identifying anything or figuring out what you've got. And I will see if there are any questions in the chat. So, okay, I see one. When we remove the bagworm bags, is it necessary to destroy the bag, or is removal enough to kill the inhabitants? So that's a good question. I would definitely destroy them just to make sure. If you were to leave the bags on the ground, a male could definitely still emerge and mate with other females everywhere. I doubt that a female that was left on the ground in its bag would actually be able to mate and reproduce. But it's hard to tell. I don't know. So I would definitely, just to make sure, put them in a bucket of soapy water, or compost them or something like that. Throw them in the trash in a bag or something like that, or freeze them. Those are all ways that will kill the bagworms in their bags. So very good question, though. Otherwise, it doesn't look like I have any other questions for the bolos. So I think I might stop sharing and turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, we'll let Mike get set up.
Thanks, Matt.
All right.
Let me hold on here. Get my slideshow started. And I want to start with a Bolo quiz, just a one question. See, kind of test your knowledge here. Share my screen. Let's see. I believe it is slideshow right here. Okay. This is a photograph taken on in a landscape bed across the driveway from my dentist's office. I had to go to the dentist last week. And on my way out, stopped the car and got out to take pictures of these Madagascar periwinkle, AKA annual vincas, with this disease problem. There's some chlorosis or yellowing. It looks like they haven't grown well. There's some of the stems are actually dying and drying up. And so I offer this BOLO quiz. What is the #1 disease of annual vinca in the landscape, I should say, in North Carolina? And let me launch the poll and let you vote as to what you think. And I guess it's not a hint, but this disease pictured is the #1, I would say, on our annual vincas in the landscape in North Carolina. So I also, while we're voting here, I admire Matt's optimism. He said something about thinking that, or saying that, what was it, that we have another month to go of hot weather here? I hope that's the case, that by September we're cooling off. Who would have guessed that we would have seen smoke from wildfires way out west coming here? So things are a little crazy, but Matt, I hope you're right. All right. Looks like voting is slowing down, so we will go another 5 seconds here. And share the results. So it looks like all of the choices got a fair amount of response. Fortunately, the plurality here, letter C, is in fact the correct answer. This is Phytophthora blight. So I wouldn't worry about bacterial blight in this crop unless I were a propagator or a greenhouse operator producing the plants. Black root rot, you can get both in production and in the landscape, although I don't remember seeing it in the landscape in our samples here, but I have heard that it can be. And Rhizoctonia blight is another one you could confuse for Phytophthora blight, but it is less common, and it tends to mat the leaves together rather than leaving them dead but looser. So very good. I will then move on to a real quick run through. It's, again, always hard this time of year because there's so many things you could say, and I probably err on the side of saying too much, but let me go through quickly what you might want to be on the lookout for in the month of August coming up. First, on our trees and shrubs, many hosts will be stressed by the high temperatures. We're expecting it to be pretty hot later this week. And depending on what the rain does, we may see some drought stress as well. We've kind of backed off in most of North Carolina from the drought situation that we started to get into earlier this year, which is good. Always don't think just about diseases and insects, but about other factors, cultural, environmental issues. So trees that were planted at the wrong time of year or planted too deeply, that may have gotten J-rooted in the planting process or have girdling roots from where they were and how they were grown prior to transplanting, and so forth. Phytophthora and Armillaria root rots are always a suspect, especially on certain hosts, and we've talked about some of those in the past. And powdery mildews, as the season gets later and later, we're going to be seeing more and more of those on our trees and shrubs, but in most cases, those are not really causing damage. Flowering cherry, we had a couple of inquiries recently about this. I think there were a couple, but one in particular that stands out that we got recently. Nice photo from a couple of years ago there on the right of shot hole. This is not insect feeding, it's an infection in the leaf, most likely from a fungus called Passiflora circumcissa, and the hole drops out, leaving the shot hole effect. You can also get yellowing and defoliation with this. On oaks, Tubacia leaf spot, especially as the leaves start to reach their end of their functional life, start to senesce, we'll see these fungi that were present start to expand. See the Tubacia leaf spot on the far right picture there, quite common on oak. Also bacterial leaf scorch, which we pictured in the past, and slime flux. We have had our first bacterial leaf scorch on oak come in this year in the clinic. Roses, a couple of cases of rose rosette coming in. So that one is always good to be on the lookout for. I expect that we'll possibly see a little bit more of it coming in once the weather cools off a little. And black spot and passiflora leaf spot, both, of course, throughout the growing season on our roses. Ceridium canker causing Leyland cypress tips to die and often turn sort of an orangish color, versus internal browning, where the oldest needles are shading out and dropping off, just a natural process and not something to be concerned about unless you're getting the more recent years needles involved. Switching to the fruit trees, there's a disease called Marsinia leaf blotch, which wasn't on my radar, but I learned about it for the first time just within the last couple of weeks on some samples that came in. It's a relative of the fungus that causes black spot on rose, and you can see that the symptom is somewhat similar, as are the signs. They're very small fruiting bodies in there. You can't see them in this photograph. So I was that was interesting to see that, and it's something that has only been in North Carolina, I believe, since 2018, but it's something to be aware of and on the lookout for. Of course, the big thing now this time of year is going to be the fruit themselves. So we'll be wanting to watch out for bitter rot. It's that large spot there in the photograph, which has a V-shaped cross-section to it if you were to cut the fruit in half. And then the superficial and cosmetic sooty blotch and fly speck on the epidermis or the cuticle of the apple fruit. In brambles, we may still be seeing some cane blight. On grapes, both bunch grape and muscadine, Pierce's disease, which is a Xylella fastidiosa, like bacterial leaf scorch we mentioned a moment ago. So that should be starting up soon on both of those kinds of grapes. Black rot as well, but on the fruit, on your bunch grapes versus a leaf spot on the muscadines. And on the bunch grapes, downy mildew is another thing to be watching for. Brown rot and scab, as we mentioned last month on peach, and pecan scab to be on the lookout for. In the vegetable garden, many species, if the nutrients are starting to get depleted there in the soil, you may see some nutrient deficiencies. Also root knot nematodes, picture there in the center, and southern stem blight could be happening. Don't see it that often, but look at the base of the stem of a wilted plant to see if you see a lesion there and possibly the actual mycelium and the sclerotia of the fungus. On beans, anthracnose as well as Cercospora leaf spot, pictured in the upper right. On tomato, different kinds of leaf spots, both bacterial spot, also septoria leaf spot. And now that the season's getting a little bit on, we could start seeing the gray leaf spot, the stemphilium moving in. But they look very similar on the plant. Early blight, it's not too late for early blight. And late blight, so far haven't seen it, as far as I know, on tomato in North Carolina this year, but it's always important to be on the lookout for, especially as it impacts the commercial production of tomatoes. Bacterial wilt still could come in on tomato, and on your heirlooms especially, be aware of the possibility of fusarium wilt. And finally, growth cracks on the fruit would be another thing that you may have some folks asking about. In cucurbits, downy mildew continue to be something to watch for, as well as on the squash and pumpkin, powdery mildew. Finally, the turf grasses, a brown patch, large patch, which are similar fungi, but one that gets on cool season grasses stressed by heat, and the other that gets on warm season grasses when it gets cooler. And the large patch, of course, being characterized by a large patch. We don't have the turf grass diagnostics folks in our lab anymore, but I used to kid them about the what I felt were unimaginative names that they came up with for their diseases, like large patch and brown patch. Fairy ring, that's a little more imaginative. You can have that any turf grass, any time of year, of course. Gray leaf spot on fescues or St. Augustine grass, pictured there in the upper right. Summer patch, and also rust, the little pustules there on the individual blades that you could see if you looked up close. And I'll mention rustin again in a moment about the, oh, what happened? I'm Not sure. I'm sorry about this, folks. I'm going to have to get out of this so that I can figure out why the, aha. Sorry, I had hidden. Okay, I'm gonna have to share again. Apologize for that. I had my flower bed bolos as a hidden slide, so you couldn't see it, and neither could I. The annual vincas mentioned before about Phytophthora and Rhizoctonia, which also, as it happens, are problems that you should be looking out for on petunias. Rusts coming in, not looking like the gymnosporangium rusts we saw on apples and pears and junipers early in the year, but these more of the yellow to orangish red pustules, typically on the underside of the leaves. You've probably already seen it on hollyhock, and we could start seeing it on things like aster and maybe even Vernonia, some other things coming in. Septoria leaf spot and downy mildew on our black-eyed Susans, seen in the center lower picture there. And both Alternaria, which is a fungus, and Xanthomonas, a bacterium, causing leaf spots and petal spots on zinnia, if you can see the spots through all the powdery mildew on the zinnia, at least in our yard. All right, and again, I see that Caroline had put the link into our Bolos list for August if you want to see more on our website. So I will stop sharing and see if I can check the chat here.
Thank you, Mike. That was great. And I think that was a really quick recovery with the hidden slides. It's challenging with all these windows.
Yeah, that was my fault. I apologize for that. I see the question here. What is J rooting? J rooting is something that happens when you plant a tree with a taproot and it goes into the hole, and that taproot gets turned upward as it's put in the hole rather than downward, and that causes problems for the development of the tree later. I kind of sort of also use the term when, let's say, a root has grown, and it's more of an L than a J, has grown sideways when it hits the bottom of a pot. So that's what that refers to. It's a type of root malformation due to the way that the tree is planted. Let's see. Oh, I see Caroline has already answered that. All right, I guess if there are no other questions, then I will turn it back over to Charlotte to talk about what to plant instead of English ivy. Oh, she's got announcements. I'm sorry. All right, Charlotte.
Hey, Mike, thank you. Yes, yeah, just took me a minute to find all my buttons again. I just wanted to follow up on the rust and Vernonia. I have several Vernonia in my yard that are orange with rust, so it's definitely showing up on Vernonia, and also some Amsonias. And I keep meaning to look up what the alternate host, or if that's a rust species that has an alternate host, just to learn more about it. But heavy rust on Vernonia here at the Glen house or garden. And so if you've got things like that going on in your landscape, we want you to go out and take some pictures and share them with us, because that is what our August Plants, Pests, and Pathogens will feature. Your photos from your yard of pests or diseases or other mysteries around your landscape or garden. So we have a Google form set up, and I'm going to open the chat back up so I can drop the link in. So we have a Google form that will let you submit the images, and there's the link. I just dropped it in the chat. One caveat with Google Forms is, of course, anybody can fill out a Google form itself, but if you want to upload a file, such as an image, you have to be logged into a Google account. So if you don't have a Google account, you can certainly create one. They are free. It takes about 10 seconds. That doesn't mean you ever need to use it for anything else, or that you have to start using Gmail or anything like that. But you will need to have a Google account to upload those pictures to the form. But we want to see them, and we look forward to this. This is always a lot of fun. And just to make sure we have enough time to go through the images, and Matt and Mike have time to look through them and diagnose them, make sure to get those images uploaded by August 18th. And we will send a reminder about that as well with the links. And if you go to the EMG Intranet, one of the announcement banners there on the homepage screen will be about this, and you can click on it and get to that photo submission form and more information.
So Charlotte, excuse me for interrupting, but if you go back to that slide, I don't know, did you plan it? That looks like a needle rust on the pine there, and at least one of the rusts on Vernonia does have the alternate. There's a Coleosporium, and I think the alternate host may be pine, actually, a needle rust. And I'm not sure, but that could be. I know there's the one that gets on Solidago on goldenrod that alternates with pine that way.
Yeah, I did not plan it. This is just a screen capture from last month where Matt introduced, the submitting your photos, but that was just a happy accident. I guess when you talk about plants and plant diseases and pests enough, everything just comes together. And I thought we had a question about, can you only submit one question or one disease or insect? No, you can submit multiple. You can just submit, use the form to submit multiple different issues. Just submit one at a time, and once you submit that, there'll be an option that says submit another, and you can just keep submitting them if you have lots of things going on and lots of pictures to share. But we do encourage you to share multiple pictures of each issue, including a close-up that's focused, and then also a picture that's just kind of the whole plant or the plant in the landscape, just to get a feel for how those symptoms are distributed. So more than one image of each individual problem, but you can certainly submit multiple problems. All right, so we'll go to Plant These Instead and then come back to some final announcements. And our Plant These Instead this month is for English ivy or Heterohelix. So English ivy does have some pest and disease issues, but we're really talking about not planting it because of its potential to become invasive. And you have likely seen it growing in natural areas and forested areas. And so when it just is left alone, it will creep into those areas. It will also seed into those areas where birds carry the fruit, the seed inside of the fruit. And as you can see in this picture, the dense foliage just smothers everything and prevents things from reseeding and regenerating. So it just totally displaces native vegetation, and then anything that relied on that native vegetation now, has nothing to feed on. It'll climb trees, and when it climbs trees over time, it can topple them. It can cause other issues with trees. So it can really destroy natural habitats. And on top of that, it is a reservoir for bacterial leaf scorch, which is a disease that is fatal to maples, oaks, sycamore, and grapes. So it is tackling trees in more than one way. So what are some things we can plant instead of ivy? First, I just want to take a look again. So, you're probably most familiar with ivy with the very classic ivy-shaped leaf, which is the juvenile foliage. But one thing, when ivy is allowed to climb and get up to where it gets a little more light, it will shift growth form from that juvenile growth to mature growth, and the leaf shape changes and it starts to bloom. And it starts to branch. So it's no longer just this kind of low-growing, kind of flat-growing vine. It branches out and can almost look like a tree when it starts to produce this mature growth. Kind of, you may have seen poison ivy do a similar thing. And when it starts to bloom and then it produces these berry-like fruit, the birds will spread it around. So it's not just creeping through our forest, it's also being spread through seed production. So what can we plant instead? Well, there's kind of two reasons we plant ivy. One, as a vine, then also sometimes as a ground cover. So we're going to look at alternatives for both uses. And for vines, and we're focusing on full shade because that's the thing with ivy, is it will tolerate full shade. And there's not a lot of vines that will, because really vines evolve to get to the sun. They don't like to be in the shade. They're always trying to climb out of it. But a couple of vines that will grow in the shade are hydrangeas. Actually, we don't often think about hydrangeas as being vines because most of them are shrubs, but there are hydrangeas that are vining. And we have the Japanese hydrangea vine, which is Hydrangea hydrangioides, that you see here, which has a nice leaf, but also this really pretty flower that blooms in the summer. And it has, you know, both little fertile flowers as well as these bracts, which look like petals kind of interspersed among the flowers, which give it a delicate appearance when it's in bloom. And there are some forms, particularly the cultivar Moonlight, which has this kind of pewter looking foliage. So the foliage itself is pretty, especially in the spring when it first comes out. So the Japanese hydrangea vine is an option for a vine for shade. And then if you're looking for a native plant, we do have a native climbing hydrangea, the Hydrangea barbara. So it will produce these white flowers in early summer. These vines are both deciduous, so they do lose their leaves. And they're both tolerant of heavy shade, but if they do get more of a dappled or part shade, they're going to bloom more prolifically. So they'll grow in heavy shade, they'll produce some bloom in heavier shade, but if they get a little bit of dappled sunlight, that'll encourage more flower production. So a couple of vine options for shady areas, and now some ground cover options. So especially when we're looking at planting ground covers adjacent to natural areas, you know, anytime you're planting into a natural area that especially connects to larger woodland areas, you want to be really careful about what you're planting, because there's even greater potential for what gets planted there at the edge to move into the forest. So focusing on a couple of native ground covers that would be good in shady areas, starting with wintergreen, Gaultheria procumbens. It's a little woody kind of subshrub. It just creeps along the ground. It gets to be about 6 inches tall. And it is related to blueberry. You see a picture of the flower there, and it's reminiscent of that blueberry flower, and it's followed by these little berries. So like blueberry, it likes those acidic soils that are moist but well drained. So good internal drainage. I have it planted in some clay. But the clay, there's a little bit, added some organic matter to the clay, and it's kind of on a little bit of a slope. So it's getting good drainage, and it's doing very well there. And it is evergreen. And the name wintergreen actually comes from the foliage. If you mash it up, it has that wintergreen not flavor. I haven't actually tasted it, but the wintergreen smell. So a nice little native ground cover. For something herbaceous or herbaceous perennial, foam flower, Tiarella cordifolia, is a really good one. It has these lovely spring flowers, which the bees will visit. There is a cultivar, a selection named Running Tapestry, which was especially selected for its vigor as a ground cover because it produces these stolons, and it really is a good one for covering ground. It gets nice dense foliage. It definitely likes more shade. I've got it in one location where it gets a little bit of sun in the morning, and it looks a little toasty right now, but in heavier shade, it's nice and green, and it's the tapestry part of the name refers to the markings on the foliage. So it does have these kind of variable darker colored markings in the foliage. So a good ground cover. And this variety particularly during the winter doesn't go completely dormant. It kind of holds on to those older leaves, and they turn a bronzy red color, which is quite pretty. So even in winter, there's a little bit of, something there to look at. Other options include ferns. So ferns, well known for thriving in the shade. I believe we were talking about ferns when the sound disconnected, and we were looking at Christmas fern as a great option, a native evergreen fern, which will often form kind of dense colonies. You'll need to plant, it's not a real, it has short rhizomes. It spreads slowly from the crown, and it will spread by spores. So I would start off planting it kind of close together to get dense coverage. But if you're looking for some more vigorously spreading ferns, or ferns that spread out naturally through rhizomes or stolons, things like the southern maidenhair fern. This is another native fern. This one is deciduous. It loses all its foliage in the winter, but it's a very thick mat of roots that it makes, and really is good at suppressing weeds and other things. So you may have heard of the northern maidenhair fern, and this is definitely a relative. is the southern maidenhair fern. And I've definitely found it to be very tough and resilient in the landscape, and preferring shade like most ferns. And then a non-native, the autumn fern, which is called autumn fern for the bronze new growth, kind of looks like autumn color. And this one is actually evergreen and a pretty vigorous spreader, when planted in shady areas. So that one can make a good ground cover. And just to finish off, we have some native sedges. And of course, I want to refer you back to our May Plants, Pests, and Pathogens, where our guest speaker, Shannon Curry from Hoffman Nursery, talked about sedges. And you can watch that recording to learn more about sedges, which have like this grass-like look, and include things like Pennsylvania sedge, Cherokee sedge, or Texas sedge that could be planted as ground covers in shady areas. The Texas sedge even tolerates mowing and is it can take a little bit of sun and tolerates dry soil, so extremely tough one if you're looking for a potential lawn alternative in a shadier area. All right, so you can explore lots more options for ground covers or vines in shady areas. Specifically, if you're looking for alternatives to ivy, if you set the cultural conditions, if you go up to the Find a Plant link and under cultural conditions, say for light, you're looking at deep shade, and under whole plant characteristics, you're looking for a ground cover that has evergreen leaves. So that'll give you 32 options. So more things that you can look at and learn about on the Plant Toolbox. And we'll just close things out with some announcements. Starting off with a huge, huge congratulations to our Master Gardener volunteers in Orange County and in Durham County, who both had projects submitted to the International Master Gardener Search for Excellence that were recognized as first place. So our Master Gardener volunteers in Orange County submitted their demo garden, which is the courthouse stormwater garden, and it received first place in the demo garden category. And then our Master Gardener volunteers in Durham County submitted their tomato grafting project, and it received first place in research. And this is, international. So all across North Carolina, but all across the United States, including Canada. And there's also a Master Gardener program in South Korea. So many, many congratulations. And if anybody else, if your group has placed an International Search for Excellence, please let us know. We haven't gotten the official notification that lists all of the winners from the IMG committee. So I've just heard about both of these groups and wanted to just say many, many congratulations to them. But let us know if your group also has received recognition for International Master Gardener Search for Excellence. There's a new extension publication, and I think this one will probably get a lot of interest. And it is Dogs and Turfgrass Interactions. And it talks about the best turfgrass choices for high traffic areas, so places that dogs are active, dealing with urine patch, dog exposure to pesticides, and dogs eating grass. I found was particularly interesting, the section on the myths around dogs eating grass. So you'll be able to check that out and learn more about it, along with the many other publications and fact sheets available from NC State Extension. For your calendar, for next month, Google Like a Pro. This will be August 26th. We're really excited to be joined by librarians from NC State's libraries. We got Tisha Mintic and Hillary Fox, and they'll be giving us tips on how to use Google to make your searches more efficient. And so this will include things like finding YouTube videos or looking for sources, specific sources such as NC State Extension. So we encourage everybody to join us then. And if you're not, we will record it, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. Then one more call for our Inspire, Connect, Empower webinar series. We have been asking for people who want to talk about their Extension Master Gardener hotline, and we've expanded the focus of this webinar. We're going to schedule it for early October, And we are going to expand the focus. Instead of just talking about technology, we will also want to hear about what kind of training and resources have been provided in your county to help the hotline be more successful. What have you found to be effective for motivating and supporting the volunteers that are working on the hotline? So if you're a Master Gardener volunteer who helps coordinate your hotline, we want to hear from you. We'd love for you to be part of the webinar. If you're an agent and you have tips to share, same. We would love to hear from you and want you to be part of the webinar. So let us know if you're interested. If you've got things to share, you can contact us at ncemgprogram@ncsu.edu. Of course, the J.C. Ralston Arboretum continues their exciting lineup of both in-person and online events. You can go to their website, go to events in the calendar to see a full listing, including things like webinar, I believe this one's coming up tomorrow, on container water gardening. They also have plant lovers tours, midweek with Mark. He'll be talking about cold hardy palms and cycads. That'll be on August 11th. And there's lots more stuff on the calendar. I encourage you to check it out. And then the International Master Gardener Conference itself is coming up soon, September 12th through the 17th. It will be online and it is open to the public. So you're encouraged to invite your friends to participate with you. And you don't have to be a Master Gardener volunteer to register. Registration's $150. You can learn more about the conference on the website or their Facebook page, which is IMGC 2021. Really exciting lineup of speakers and activities going on throughout that conference. And that finishes up. Of course, we will be back next month, August 24th, featuring your images. And let's see if there were any questions. I see Caroline shared the link on English ivy control, which is great. And of course, the slides that we were just looking at are available. You can go to the Plant These Instead archive, and all of the links, all of the items that were linked on the slides are available there, including one of them is a link to control recommendations. I see there was a question about the Southern Maidenhair Fern. Will it outcompete Japanese stiltgrass? Where I have grown it, it makes such a dense mat that nothing really comes up through, you know, the root mass itself, kind of the crown, which is a creeping crown. And I have grown it in areas, I'm just thinking with Japanese stiltgrass. So the Japanese stiltgrass still comes up around it, but not so much inside of it. So over time, as you got a really dense planting, you know, it would take a few years for it to spread. And of course, would depend on your initial planting density. But I think it would be a good one to compete with Japanese stiltgrass, but you'll just have to be vigilant while it's getting established and while it's spreading to keep that weeded out. All right. Oh yes, and we did have mentioned when we were talking about English ivy that it can damage structures that it climbs, and that's very true. Most, you know, English ivy does have those clinging roots. Vines have different ways of climbing. The twiners, you know, twine around stuff, but anything with clinging roots can have that potential to damage things it climbs upon. All right, so that is all the questions I'm seeing, and just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next month. And hope, as Matt predicted, that will be our last month of hot weather, and then we'll go on to fall-like weather.